Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to a very special episode. I thought I'd do something possibly a little bit different today. It's somewhat in the mold of my top 5 episodes that I do, but a little bit more expanded and personalized, and I wanted to package this in a very interesting way, so hopefully that interests you. For those who are familiar, my top 5s are where I pick a topic in progressive rock, usually generated by my wife, and I talk through my top 5 choices, basically off the cuff, just off the top of my head, based on my prior prog rock knowledge. But today I wanted to jump into a topic inspired by Sea of Tranquility, a video Pete Pardo did with my friend Scott from the Prog Corner. They talked about the top 10 prog albums that changed their life, and I thought that was a really cool topic that inspired some really great discussion. So check out that video. Really incredible to hear two experts in this field talk about their favorite prog albums, and not just really their favorites, but the ones that impacted them personally. So really great topic, and so I thought I'd do that myself here with the top 10 albums that changed my life. These aren't all necessarily prog albums. Most of them are, of course, because that's my favorite genre, but I wanted to go through a bit of a musical history through the years of the music that has touched me and has impacted me. And like they mentioned on that show, these aren't my favorite albums that I would put in a ranking of my top favorites. These are just personal ones that really changed my outlook about music when they came out, that really led me down a lane towards my current musical tastes and towards what I do here on the channel. So I thought it would be a cool show to get into. So to start, when I was really young, my dad got me started on the Beatles. That was really my first love in music. So that's the first thing I wanted to put on my 10 albums list. A little bit maybe of a cheat, but these were really the first 2 major albums that I had, if you even consider them. They're compilations. These are the Beatles Red and Blue compilation albums that came out that have a great track list of all of their big hits, essentially. And so that's what I had on repeat as a young kid, listening to music and just falling in love with this. And my dad would play Beatles constantly. It's like his favorite band of all time. So that gave me the foundation to build upon with my musical tastes. So that's why I feel like that was the first real music that meant something to me and wasn't just in the background or part of a show or, Disney songs or whatever. This was real music that I was really falling in love with, and it was sparking my love for music at a young age. And then we got into my high school years, and I was more into alternative rock, modern rock of the time. This was back in like late 90s, early 2000s, where I was really into this style, and I'd listened to all of the big radio singles and things like that. I wasn't really into albums necessarily. I was just trying to find cool singles, cool songs that they played on the radio or on TV or whatever. But then I came across this group that really changed everything for me. This is Incubus and their album Morning View. I actually went out and picked up this album in full, not on vinyl at the time, on CD of course, but since I've picked it up on vinyl because it's so nostalgic to me. So I basically picked up this album because the singles were impressing me so much at the time. I was in love with the band. I thought it was a really cool sound. And so I thought, well, I might as well check out and see what their full album's like. And it blew me away to listen to a full album that I loved all the way through. I listened to it constantly. I went and picked up their whole back catalog. So to me, it was the first time I really did a deep dive into a band and really explored their catalog and listened to albums front to back rather than just their hit songs on the radio. And so it brought a more album-focused feeling to me and was the first true album that I really fell in love with. And so I wanted to mention it. And I still love the band to this day. I think they're a great band. Not proggy, but definitely have a cool sound and a cool vibe to them. But moving on more into the prog section of my listening habits, my dad is the one who showed me prog. That's his music. He grew up in the 70s. And so he's a big fan of certain prog bands and shared them with me. We basically go on drives and play these full albums in the car. Part of it was while I was learning to drive. He'd teach me how to drive while we'd play these albums in the background. And so that brings back memories of that time when I was in, that teenager spot and doing that kind of stuff. So one of the first ones he showed me that really struck me was Octopus by Gentle Giant. So that would be on my list of albums. I really fell in love with Gentle Giant, one of the first prog bands that I truly thought was incredible. Gentle Giant was a band that I fell in love with, maybe an odd one to be the first prog band to get you in, but I loved the quirkiness of it. I loved the cool counterpoint vocal harmonies. I've always loved that, even from a young age. I love those vocal rounds and things that they do. And I just found it really interesting and captivating. I like adventurous music, and it really captured that sense of adventure and excitement. So that was one of the first bands we really went through a lot of their discography together in the car, listening together. And then we moved on to Yes. And this is the album that stood out to me with Yes, which still, of course, stands out to me to this day, is Close to the Edge, which I truly love with all my heart. This really changed my mind. Really expanded my mind, I should say, to liking something very different. The opening to this was crazy and chaotic, but I loved it, and it just led to these big, majestic sounds that just blew my young mind at the time, and I just couldn't help but fall in love. My dad hyped up this record, saying it was one of his all-time favorites. This was going to be something special, and so it was one of those moments I was really excited to get to, because I think we started with like the Yes album moving chronologically, and so getting finally to this one, I was just really excited to hear this big epic that he kept building up as one of the greatest songs that he's ever heard. And it lived up to the hype. I love the cool bass line throughout. Chris Squire's bass is so prominent in that track to me. The whole breakdown in the middle, the big organ section later. It's just a seminal track and a seminal album that I've always loved and is still in the top tier of my favorite albums of all time. So that really changed the landscape for me. And then we moved on, of course, to Genesis. So this is the next one that really spoke to me. And that is the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which I really fell in love with also. My dad, one of my dad's all-time favorite albums, obviously. He's talked on my channel about it. Go check that video out if you haven't, the top 5 prog albums with my dad. And it just sparked my love for concept records, which has been a common thread throughout my life as well. I just love a good concept, a good story. It sparks my creativity. It has so many interesting elements to it. Maybe it's not perfect 100% of the way through. There's little odd tracks here and there that maybe don't hit as hard as other things, but all in all, it just is such a interesting, cool story and vibe that I just couldn't help but falling in love with this record, and it just once again expanded my mind and my tastes to be able to handle these big double albums that tell a story, that have a lot of different musical nuance to them. It really expanded my mind and taught me more about music as I was continuing on this journey. And by and large, it really ended there with my dad. Those are the big 3 bands that he likes. He likes a smattering of different prog albums, maybe beyond those. Like he likes some Jethro Tull albums and some Kansas albums and things like that. But really, these are his 3 big bands: Gentle Giant, Yes, and Genesis. And once we went through all of their classic albums, that was basically, he was like, that's all I have for you. And I was still craving more. I was like, there's got to be more there. There's got to be new music that's doing the same thing, but in a more modern context. Because I still loved that modern alternative rock sound and stuff that I was exploring elsewhere, and classic rock and other styles and genres. So I went off and searched for modern music that did the same things, that had that same progressive flavor. And I came across Transatlantic as an example of a modern prog band, and I saw that it was made up of several other bands. And so I made a little bit of a mixtape of all these different bands that compose Transatlantic to see if any of them would be interesting. And I showcased it to my dad, and we decided to go right then to the store, to Virgin Megastore, the record store at the time, and pick up a couple albums. And we picked up this one, the next one in my list here. This is Spocksbeard's The Light. I don't have it on vinyl yet, unfortunately, but here it is on CD, the original CD we picked up then, I believe. And we also picked up Flower King's Back in the World of Adventures, so kind of an honorable mention there. But this was the first one I heard. In fact, we picked up these CDs, me and my dad, and they sat in his office for a while because he got busy and we weren't able, usually we do our car rides and listen to music together, and it just wasn't happening. But I was really itching to hear this music. I'd gotten all excited about it, so I asked him if I could grab them and listen to them on my own first, and he said sure, that would be fine. So I put on the Spocksbeard one, and I was totally blown away by it. This really spoke to me, and to me, Spocksbeard became the first band that felt truly like my band. These other bands, yes, Genesis, Gentle Giant, as much as I love them, they felt like my dad's bands. These are the bands that my dad is sharing with me, but I didn't feel like they were personal to me, and in a lot of cases they weren't making music anymore, or at least not making the same kind of classic music that they were back then. So for me, I felt like Spocksbeard was the first time I had a real band to fall in love with and to claim as my own. And I love Neil Morse's style. The whole Senior Velasco section in The Light, where it goes into this more flamenco style section, was just a mind-blowing moment that music could be so creative and expansive to do that. I love the epics. I love Neil Morse's style and how it had cool, catchy pop hooks, but it had these cool progressive rock instrumental explosions. Just a great blend of stuff that captivated me at the time and still does now, and of course led to my love of Neil Morse and all of his projects. So all of those Neil Morse albums that came after are all seminal and important to my development as a lover of music, but I decided to use this as the one that entered me into that world, and thus was probably the most impactful for my whole musical journey. So moving on from there, I started to explore the heavier edges of the sound. I saw that a lot of people enjoyed prog metal, and Dream Theater was another one of those bands that was featured in Transatlantic. So I'm like, well, maybe I should explore them further. The first time I heard a Dream Theater song, I thought it was a bit too heavy. I listened to The Glass Prison, in fact, and I'm like, well, this is more like a heavy metal Metallica type thing, and I'm not really a metal guy. But I heard so much buzz about this album that I'm going to show next, called Scenes from a Memory, that I went out and bought it without having heard a note of it. That was what you did back then. I just bought the CD based on the strength of people's reviews of it and them saying it's just a landmark album. And I listened to it and I fell in love. I had a second band that I could claim as my own that I felt was important and special to me. And this harkened back to that Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by being a story album and having a concept to it, but it was so creative musically. And yeah, it had its heavier moments, but it's not a heavy metal album to me. It's more proggy, has a lot of instrumental, cool proggy moments that really inspired me and still do to this time. So that was an album that really expanded my mind and led me on a journey through prog metal, where I enjoyed bands like Pain of Salvation and Symphony X, and a lot of those at the time were like my top tier bands that I just couldn't get enough of. And so it really led me down that avenue of progressive metal. Also around the same time, I discovered another one of my 10 albums here, which is from Porcupine Tree, In Absentia, which to me was a perfect marriage of the alternative rock that I had liked when I was in high school and such, that I was talking about, the Incubus era and all of that stuff, but then bringing in a progressive flavor to it, like the stuff my dad was showing me, and the stuff I was exploring on my own, like through Pink Floyd, which my dad's not a big fan of, but I was exploring that path on my own. But I came across this record and was blown away by how it sounded. The production was pristine. It had a great blend of progressive rock, but also alternative rock and metal. And I love Steven Wilson and his style. I love the pop hooks and the harmonies and all of that stuff. And so this just really stood out to me. And Steven Wilson has probably become my second favorite musical artist of all time based on the strength of this record. To me, my yin and yang of progressive taste is shown by Neil Morse on one side of the equation and Steven Wilson on the other side. Those are my two musical heroes. And so this record really brought that to the forefront and showcased a side of prog that it could be more accessible and that it could have these pop hooks and things, but still be creative and really well crafted. And so that really expanded my mind and expanded my tastes as well. And so from here on forward, it's a little bit more difficult to find the next couple albums, because that's album number 8 on my list, so I only have a couple more to go. And one of the albums that to me really changed things a little bit, that I discovered while I was in college and exploring more facets of music, because I was really diving deep into progressive rock at this point, listening to every single thing I could find and loving it and coming across so many different things. But I expanded a bit into what I consider more of like an indie prog type space. And the one that stood out to me that I grabbed first is the Deer Hunter. And the first one I ever heard from the Deer Hunter was Act 3, Life and Death. I just went on a whim, just based on reviews, just based on the strength of what people were saying. Just went off to the record store once again and just bought this without having heard a note. And I fell in love with it. Once again, a concept record that had a great style to it, but it wasn't just pure progressive rock like most of the stuff I was listening to. It had a modern edge to it and had a lot of different styles that were blended within that I wasn't used to hearing in normal progressive rock. And it expanded my mind once again, led me on this journey to exploring a new favorite band that I just fell in love with and continue to fall in love with to this day. I just think they're incredible and one of the best bands of all time that don't get the respect that they truly deserve oftentimes. So another incredible group. And then the last record on my list is a record from this year. And this may be a weird one to put on the list, but I'm putting in No Spoon's latest album, Opus, as another album that to me is changing my musical landscape, because now it's the YouTube channel and the family that's been built around the YouTube channel that's really influencing my musical taste. And I have a little Prog YouTube family chat that I'm a part of a lot of us Prog YouTubers that talk to each other and recommend music to each other. And I discovered this album just out and about, just listening to different things I was looking up online before anyone was really talking about it, and was blown away on first listen. Like, this is the best thing I've heard in a long time. I got to share this with my group here. This is a must listen, and I feel like from sharing that with that group, it catapulted from there into this train of people finding it and discovering it, and it just getting more and more buzz and more excitement as it went on. And it was just such a fun thing to be a part of, to see it grow from its very start into this big thing that people were talking about and that now is being featured on these bigger channels and these bigger prog outlets. It's just a fun thing to be a part of. And to me, that's how my music taste is changing now, how my musical landscape is evolving even now. I'm finding things through the Prog YouTube experience, through recommendations from other people, or from my own research, because I want to bring things onto the channel that I think that people will love. And so it makes me really excited to discover things, to share it with you guys, to share it with my Prog YouTube family, and to see it be embraced by the public is just one of the most gratifying experiences of my life. It's just been a pleasure to be able to do these reviews and to see comments of people like, thank you so much for introducing me to this album. I wouldn't have heard it otherwise, and it's amazing. Those types of experiences are what makes my life meaningful right now, at least in terms of music. This is one of my favorite outlets and something that's really brought a new facet to my life and has once again changed my life for the better. So that is my top 10 albums that changed my life, and I wanted to talk about it. Hopefully you guys liked this list and found something to enjoy here. These are all albums I heavily recommend. They're some of the building blocks and foundations to my taste and everything that I enjoy about music. So thank you guys for joining me. Hopefully you don't mind a little bit of a longer episode, but I had a lot of fun talking about this one. So thank you guys, and I'll hopefully catch you in a future episode. Bye, everybody.